You know how men love their balls.
Madam Mayor, what a beautiful day this morning. Where are we?
It is a beautiful day. We are at the Stones River National Battlefield in Murphysboro.
It should be cool. It's a lot of Civil War history, so if you're kind of a Civil War or war buff, this should be for you.
It should be pretty cool.
Yeah, I like Civil War history. Growing up in Virginia, we got inundated in school with a lot of Civil War history because Virginia has a lot of Civil War history.
I would think so.
But Tennessee does too. So we're going to check that out today.
In for a long, cold night, tense with anticipation of the next day's battle. Opposite their lines, General Bragg's Confederate Army of Tennessee braces against the sting of winter and the harsh reality of imminent battle. By candlelight, Confederate soldier Samuel Say writes, "Just before tattoo,
the military bands on each side began their evening music. The still winter night carries the strains to a great distance. At every pause on our side, far away could be heard the military bands of the other. Finally, one of them struck up Home Sweet Home. As if by common consent, all other airs ceased, and the bands of both armies, far as the ear could reach, joined in the refrain. Who knows how many hearts were bold next day by reason of that air."
The last day of 1862 dawns cold and damp. Few had slept well, thinking about the inevitable battle. Sergeant Major Lyman Whitney of the 34th Illinois Infantry remembers.
"We were building fires and making coffee, for such permission had been granted just before daylight. The comfort of warming chilled fingers and toes and drinking a grateful cup of hot coffee outweighed for the moment any consideration of danger."
The Confederate Army makes the first move at daybreak. About 2/3 of the Southern Army, the corps of Generals Polk and Hardee, assault the right wing of the Northern Army, commanded by Major General Alexander McCook. P.R. Jones of the 10th Texas Cavalry recalls the attack.
"The onslaught was so sudden and the slaughter so great that they retreated in great confusion. They had abandoned everything to get away.
By mid-morning, the Confederates have shattered the Union right. Only the troops of Generals Sheridan and Negley hold the Federal line in the bloody fields and rock-strewn woods that were later called the Slaughter Pen. As the fighting rages in the Slaughter Pen, General Rosecrans masses fresh troops and artillery along the Nashville Pike to halt the Confederate tide. Wave after wave of Confederate attacks are repulsed at the anchor point of this new line, a place that earned the name Hell's Half Acre. By evening, the exhausted troops stop fighting. Soldiers like James L. Cooper of the 20th Tennessee Infantry won't soon forget that day.
We moved to the right, passing over many dead bodies. We lay down, but for a time sleep was impossible to men who had passed through such dreadful scenes that day, and expected them on the morrow. Many souls had passed into eternity that day.
General Bragg believes he has won a Confederate victory. He telegraphs Richmond, "God has granted us a happy new year." The next morning, Bragg is surprised to learn Union troops still occupy the area. New Year's Day passes without a fight, as both sides tend to their wounded and dead, and regroup for the next round of battle. Civilians join the soldiers on the battlefield, looking for loved ones. Some, like G.B. Moon, are unsuccessful.
I spent most of the day searching for my fallen brother, but all in vain. He sleeps among the unknown dead. I went home.
For James Cooper, the light of day brings new horrors.
The night had been very cold, and numbers of the wounded had perished. I had been detailed on the infirmary corps and was busily occupied all the morning bringing in the wounded, both Confederate and Federal. I walked over the battlefield and saw some terrible sights.
January 2nd begins quietly, but the quiet is short-lived. Under orders from General Bragg, troops commanded by Major General John Breckinridge attack the Union left. By late afternoon, fleeing Union soldiers are pushed back across Stones River at McFadden's Ford. W.J. McMurray of the 20th Tennessee Infantry describes the scene.
The first line of Yankees fell back to their second. We pressed them so closely. In 20 minutes, the whole mass was going back to the river.
On the heights above, 57 Union cannon are assembled, and the pursuing Confederates are hit with a deadly wall of fire. This was to be one of the bloodiest charges of the entire war. Within minutes, hundreds of men are killed and wounded. Major General Thomas L. Crittenden witnessed the attack.
The very floor just seemed to fall, and not a Confederate reached the river.
About an hour later, the battle is over. Captain H.B. Clay of Pegram's Cavalry Brigade hears the sound of defeat.
The Yankees' three cheers sounded hatefully in my ears after they realized that the attack had failed and would not be renewed.
The Confederates withdraw, and over the next 2 days, the Army of Tennessee pulls out of Murphysboro. Nearly 24,000 men were killed, wounded, or captured in one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. General Rosecrans claimed victory, boosting Northern morale and adding muscle to President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Murphysboro proved to be a critical strategic supply depot for the Union Army for the duration of the conflict.
No, it looks like they joined for adventures. Isn't that kind of why we're here?
A little different, I think.
And even here, some women disguised as men. We'll just leave that alone, huh? Some things don't change.
Well, they were disguising as men to enlist.
Yeah, for different reasons. I get that.
Daniel Griffin, 38th Indiana.
I shall partake freely of the pleasing of camp life as they pass.
old belt buckle.
Yeah. Some of the items they had with them.
Lucifers.
Surprised there's not a bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey in there. Or maybe that came later. Military music. So they would use bugles and drums to give commands, like to charge and to back off and to regroup and to pretty realistic little scene here, huh?
Two major transportation routes ran through the fortress: the Nashville Pike and the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad. The fortress and several strategically placed blockhouses protected these vital arteries of supply and communication.
It's amazing how many lives were lost in just 3 days.
I know, 23,525 killed, wounded, or captured. That's a lot.
And a lot of people wonder why so many lives lost. Well, back during the Civil War, they didn't do what they did in wars that followed. They used cover and concealment. They built bunkers. They had flak jackets. They had helmets. So they were trying to protect their lives. They were hiding behind trees. But during the Civil War, they were literally walking across open fields in a straight line. So they were an open target to easily kill. The military, I say we, the militaries did not learn defensive mechanisms to help protect your life from being shot until well after the Civil War.
And look at these hooked bayonets. They said they were used to drag decomposing bodies to the burial sites.
And pretty crude instruments back then. Well, they just hooked the bodies and drag them.
Even in the cemeteries, it says 2,000 Confederate soldiers are buried, but only less than 200 of them were identified.
Wow.
Ever National Cemetery.
That'll be neat to go outside and see some of these actual battlefield sites and how they've preserved them for the museum. Tennessee had been the last southern state to secede from the Union. It was the first to rejoin it. Tullahoma campaign. I like how they kept a lot of the names. It gives it historical significance today when they keep the names. I bet they got battlefields in Chattanooga too. I'd like to go see.
Vice President Andrew Johnson and the military governor of Tennessee during the war. He became president after Abraham Lincoln.
Look at all these states that border Tennessee. And this is part of why we picked it, because we're located right around in here. But look what we have access. We can get to South Carolina, although it doesn't border Tennessee. It's very close. North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, and Virginia all border Tennessee. You can get to all those states within a day's drive.
Look of the day has come back.
Yeah. It is kind of This seems to be the new look.
Yeah, everything comes back.
Yeah.
Just like bell bottoms.
Maybe bell bottoms were first discovered in bell buckle. What do you think?
Yeah.
The Union troops who fought on this ground December 31st, 1862. The Confederates were breaking through the tree line onto this field, and it was the soldiers of the Pioneer Brigade and the Chicago Board of Trade Battery who drove them back. The Pioneer Brigade was a Union Army experiment. Two of the best soldiers from each infantry company would form this brigade. These men had not trained together, nor had they ever worked together. Yet so desperate was the situation that General Rosecrans had to rely on these engineers to stop the rebel tide. Midday, December 31st, the Confederates attacked Union troops 3 times. The Confederates got within 50 yards of the Union line before being repulsed. The Union countercharged, and the line moved forward about a quarter mile to a low ridge, which they had lost earlier in the day. The Chicago Board of Trade Battery fired nearly 1,300 rounds into their attackers during the fight. A Union sergeant of the Pioneer Brigade recalled, "The rebel flag, seen dimly through the smoke and trees, wavered, started forward, and then surged back. Yes, there was no mistake about it. It was going back." The Chicago Board of Trade Battery and the Pioneer Brigade were tested and proved their worth as they held the Nashville Pike. On the bitter cold, drizzly day after Christmas, 1862, Union General William Rosecrans's army marched from Nashville to Murphysboro, where Confederate General Braxton Bragg's army had established their winter camp. President Lincoln demanded that Rosecrans move on the Confederates. So Rosecrans marched on to Murphysboro to win the victory for Lincoln. Rosecrans planned his attack for New Year's Eve of 1862. General Bragg also planned to attack on New Year's Eve. Both armies spent the day before the battle developing their battle plans and forming their battle lines. As nightfall approached, the men on both sides tried to settle in for the night. No campfires were allowed that night on either side in order to conceal positions. Union soldiers camped on a cold, damp ground where you stand now. Anxieties and fears were as prevalent in the soldiers' dreams as were the memories of loved ones back at home. Private P.R. Jones from Texas described how he spent his night before the battle. When nightfall came, we were in a lane with rail fences on each side about 400 yards from the enemy. Our orders were to speak only in a whisper, as the enemy's pickets were not more than 100 yards in front, the plan of battle being to take them by surprise the next morning. Soldiers anxiously waited through the freezing night, anticipating the battle would be fought the next day. For many soldiers that camped that night, it would be their last. The rocks before you in the woods were the scene of fierce fighting on December 31st, 1862. General James Negley's division of the Union Army fell back into these rocks, which provided a natural defensive position when General Rosecrans ordered them to hold and delay the Confederate onslaught. With General Philip Sheridan's division covering their rear, Negley's men withstood several attacks between 10 and 11:30 in the morning. At noon, a massive Confederate attack organized by General A.T. Stewart and 4 other Confederate commanders shattered Sheridan's lines, leaving Negley's division surrounded on 3 sides. Negley's men continued to fight, but mounting casualties and the danger of being surrounded finally forced them to retreat. As they tried to run from the rocks, Confederate fire piled the dead and wounded in heaps. The rocks were covered in blood and gore. Red rivulets ran down through the cracks and pooled in low spots. Soldiers who survived this bloody fight aptly named this place Slaughter Pen. 40% of Negley's and Sheridan's divisions had become casualties. Their adversaries did not fare much better. The cost of this delaying action was high, but for the Union, it was worth it. More than 1/3 of the Confederate Army had been halted for 2 hours, buying General Rosecrans time to build a new defensive position along the Nashville Pike that would turn the tide of battle. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon on December 31st, the Confederate brigade of James Raines emerged from the woods ahead of you. Across these fields, they could see their objective, the Nashville Pike. If they could reach that road, they could cut the Federals off from their last remaining route of supply or escape. Between the Confederates and the road stood long lines of soldiers in blue with muskets at the ready. Union cannon covered the slope between the road and railroad, waiting to unleash their deadly content. General Rosecrans had used the time well that Negley and Sheridan had bought him in the slaughter pen. This 2-mile-long line, shaped like a horseshoe, would force the Confederates to make frontal assaults against massed artillery and infantry to sever the Union lifeline. Raines' men were tired, hungry, and out of ammunition, but they were ready for one last charge. Within seconds of leaving the trees, Raines was killed. His men were pummeled from all directions and gave way in a matter of minutes. More and more Confederate units arrived as the day wore on, and ever larger attacks surged toward the pike. Each time, the Union artillery beat back the gray tide. A lieutenant from Texas recalled, "The artillery opened on us and cut the timber over our heads, and it seemed that the heavens and earth were coming together." Without support from their cannon, every Confederate attack failed. The Union lifeline remained open, and chances for complete Confederate victory faded along with the last rays of the setting sun.
As we were walking on one of the sites to spot number 3, look at this hollowed out tree. Isn't this cool?
It's massive.
It is massive.
I wouldn't want to get in there, though, because there might be some snakes.
There might be.
Hundreds of men fought and perished December 31st, 1862, where you stand. The carnage was so great that the men who survived named this place Hell's Half Acre. Union Colonel William Hazen's brigade defended the Nashville Pike here at the Round Forest. They were the only unit of the Union line who held their position during 4 Confederate charges. The attacks began mid-morning. Several Confederate brigades charged the Union troops. Corporal McGee from Mississippi described the wild and chaotic scene. Then commenced the most terrible cannonading I ever witnessed. Cannons were belching forth their deadly contents at once, while thousands of small arms kept up a roar equal to the falls of Niagara. Men were swept down by hundreds. Trees, shrubs, and everything were torn up, cut off, or shivered. Hazen's men were the anchor point of the Union line that halted the Confederate tide before it reached the Nashville Pike. After the battle, Hazen's men constructed this monument to commemorate their fight in Hell's Half Acre. The Hazen Brigade Monument is the oldest intact Civil War monument in the nation.
Did you say this was like one of the longest standing?
Yeah, it's the oldest intact monument in the nation.
From the Civil War. That's pretty neat. So I guess you could say that this monument stood the test of time. (1863). Shadow's pretty bad right here.
Pretty bright out here. I noticed there's even some grave sites outside of the wall.
This stone wall is pretty cool. It would have been neat to put a stone wall around the campground.
I guess that's William Holland. William Harlan.
A corporal and a sergeant. So this wasn't one of the depicted stops along the driving route, but we came upon it because we made a wrong turn and saw a sign. So this is the headquarters, Army of the Cumberland, Major General Rosecrans, which we've heard him talked about. But this is a funny looking headquarters. I was expecting a building. Would you expect a building?
But no, it's a pyramid of balls.
Pyramid of balls. So I guess this is where the building once stood. But lots of signs saying it's being patrolled by the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department.
So this probably is the image of what every man would like his headquarters to look like. A pyramid of balls.
Now I can go for that. And here's the cemetery. There's no audio file that goes with this. So we will just talk it. It's pretty though, isn't it gorgeous? There's a nice hill right here. There's some more pyramid stacked balls.
You know how men love their balls. They keep them on display.
Really?
Just saying.
This is a neat little monument.
Beautiful eagle.
That would look really cool in our yard. We're looking for kind of a signature piece for our yard, but that would be neat. I think it's a little much. I also think it's a little heavy.
This is in memory of the officers and enlisted men
of the 15th, 16th, 18th, and 19th U.S. Infantry and Battery H, 5th U.S. Artillery, who were killed or died of wounds received at the Battle of Stone River, Tennessee.
December 31st, 1862 to January 3rd, 1863.
It's only 3 days.
It is a beautiful monument. I think we should get one of those soldier statues to put in our yard.
I do, but I've been looking at the size of them, and so far they've just been really small, and I don't think they're big enough.
Well, we'll have to keep our eye out.
Yeah, we'll keep looking.
At dawn, January 2nd, 1863, Confederate General Braxton Bragg woke to discover that Union forces had entrenched themselves on a key hill on the east side of Stones River. If the Federals placed cannon on that hill, they could threaten Confederate positions along the Nashville Pike. Bragg ordered General John Breckinridge and his 4,400-man division to reclaim the hill. Breckinridge protested, knowing that dozens of Union cannon massed on the west bank of the river could cut his men to pieces. But Bragg's decision was final. Breckinridge relayed the order to his subordinates. Soon they were restraining General Roger Hanson, commander of the Confederate Orphan Brigade, who vowed to kill Bragg for issuing such a murderous command. Breckinridge ordered his men to load their muskets and fix bayonets. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they moved forward, hoping the failing light would interfere with the Union cannoneers' aim. As they got closer, their pace quickened and the rebel yell echoed over the field. The initial charge appeared successful. Breckinridge's men pushed the Federals off the hill and pursued them toward McFadden's Ford before you. The ground shook as 57 Union cannon fired their deadly missiles into the mass of Confederates. The cannon fire was nonstop. In an hour, more than 1,800 Confederates were killed or wounded. Breckinridge's men retreated as fresh Union troops surged across the river to retake the high ground. This was the final action of the Battle of Stones River. Bragg ordered a withdrawal, and the Union gained the hard-earned victory that shaped the political and military course of the Civil War.
So, what'd you think of the tour?
It's pretty nice. I love how they have walking trails and bike trails, and then how you can also drive through it if you're not able to walk or bike through it. That's really nice.
Yeah.
It covers a large area.
It does. You have to actually take a couple of different highways to get over to point 6, which is where we are. And this is the last point on the trail. But I definitely think it's worth a visit if you're in the Murphysboro area.
Definitely. And I would love to come back here when we get our e-bikes.
I would too, because you get to see different stuff. But this is actually number 2 on the TripAdvisor of places to see in Murphysboro. So I'm glad we were able to take it in on a good day.
It's a beautiful day for this. Absolutely.